Hi, welcome to episode 47 of the ChessTDD series. I've been away for a while. I think it's excusable. I was getting married and going on a honeymoon, so there was a bit of a break there, but I'm picking up back in full force and everything, and it is I kind of, in spite of the break, remember where I left off, and I had made a note to go back in and do a little bit of refactoring cleanup where I had failed in the previous episode to give reasonable names to these methods that I had, or to this method that I had factored out into one of the variables in it. You obviously don't want something that refers to left or right when you've abstracted left and right into the calling method. So I was kind of trying to get my bearings here and reason sort of simultaneously about the name of this method, as well as the variable in the method. So I was looking a little bit and kind of playing with the name. And it is not accurate to say that I am setting en passant for destination with X offset. There's no concept like offset in this method, so what is it actually doing? And I needed a couple of passes at it, but I think I did a fairly good job. If I just read the method out loud and I forget about the bad name of that variable in there, I'm checking for validity. So I'm doing a little housekeeping up front, and then assuming everything's all right, I am getting a pawn, and if I'm successful at getting that pawn, then on the destination where that pawn is sitting, I'm going to set this en passant flag. So the first crack I had at the name was set en passant if piece exists at target, but I didn't ultimately settle at that because that's not quite right. So I'm going to say instead, if pawn exists at target, because that's really what I'm doing, and then I'm going to name this something like pawn at target, target pawn, there we go. So this is getting, more readable, I think. I'm going to go in here and flag these things as done and then move it over on the board. So, it may seem a little... Oh, and there I was doing a final search to see if I had any awkward naming of left and right remaining where I didn't want it, but might seem a little odd or nitpicky to go back and do something like that, but if you've been following along in the series, you've certainly heard me emphasize the importance of naming over and over again, so I stand by that. If I'm going to come back and read this in another 4 weeks or whatever, it's going to take me more time to read and understand what's going on. And I mean, you kind of witnessed that there. I sat there for a moment playing with the method name, kind of squinting at it. That's not the effect that you want when people are reading your code. Even if they've never seen it before, or if it's been months since you've seen your own code, you want to read and say, oh, okay, I'm going to check this particular square, see if the piece there is a pawn, and if it is, I'm going to set this flag. That's a reasonable thing to have in a method. If you're having to say, wait, what? I'm so left of who and offset. You want to go out of your way to make everything as simple and clear as humanly possible. So up next that I had left in the in progress column in Trello is to get the reverse of en passant working. So right now, what I've been doing is the scenario where the white pieces are the victims of en passant. Now I'm going to do the reverse scenario where the black pieces are the victims of en passant. So I guess this is a little bit awkward, and maybe I'll want to straighten this up later, but I think I had been doing all of the white movement followed by all the black movement in this feature file. And in this one, I decided rather than doing copy and paste that I would intermingle, because I was just sort of referring to the scenario above and creating mirror scenarios. Maybe that's not great, but it helped me get through this episode pretty successfully, so I'm going to leave it for now. This is one of the many things that I'm sort of accruing in the form of very mild tech debt. Just things that you might take a pass through at cleaning up. And maybe in the productized version of this that I've mentioned, I'll do some of those things. I think it's probably worth checking out if I do decide to do that, for the simple fact of, if you're not used to a test-driven code base, you'll probably be amazed at how quickly and easily all that cleanup happens just because of all the confidence in the actual functionality. So you might be used to refactoring as this thing that's kind of, oh yeah, we'll do that someday, and then someday never comes. But when you have a test-driven code base, you sort of go in there brutally and just move things around as you see fit. So if you're not used to this sort of thing, you might think I'm, I don't know, making false promises about my willingness to do this. And truly I'm not. It's just that this series has been going on for, going on a year or something. I'd kind of like to finish it up. I got a lot of different things that I do. So the finish line in sight, I'm not worried too much about making every little thing perfect, but it would not be too hard to do a lot of that stuff. So anyway, tangent finished. What you can see that I'm doing here is not especially exciting, but I'm just basically setting up the reverse scenario. And you'll recall that what I'm going to do is first move that white pawn, and then I'm going to move the black pawn up to be next to it, like adjacent. And then what should be able to happen is the white pawn, once the black pawn is moved up beside it, the white pawn should be able to perform a diagonal move, even though there's no black pawn diagonally in front of it, and the black pawn should be removed from the board. Actually, I don't know if I've implemented the removal. I probably have to make a Trello card for that. But what I'm testing here is just that this is an available move for the black pawn. Or excuse me, for the white pawn, now that the black pawn is going to be the victim. And predictably here it's not, because I hadn't implemented that. So I spent a little bit of time looking around and I guess kind of bemoaning the fact that all this en passant stuff is here in board. What I was doing, and if you're using NCrunch the way I am, this might be a way that you approach it, is I'm just kind of taking in what's read, which tells me vaguely the path of the failing code. That just kind of gives me a broad instinctive sense of where I want to be looking. It's by no means a perfect way to look at it, but I kind of got the feel for it, reminded myself of the code, and realized, okay, I think the first, and maybe it's the only problem, but at least the first problem is going to be this method is en passant applicable. I didn't go right to it because I was just, studying it, and true to form, I'm not editing out, me wandering and flubbing and whatnot. So I feel pretty good that this is en passant applicable is what I need to look at. And the thing I was looking for after just the red and green dots was to see if there was any place where there was vertical movement on the board, so Y plus or minus. And this was the only place I saw it. And the reason I'm looking for that is because that's the only place that there's, vertical direction parity going on. So if this is truly the only place that I'm concerning myself with whether the Y movement is forward or backwards, then, hey, maybe this is the only place that I need to make any changes. At the very least, it's a starting point. So what I'm doing here is pretty obtuse at first, just because I don't want to get cute and risk getting it wrong. So I'm going to put this if conditional here. Now, all we've been worried about up till now is the first player piece. So I'm going to guard, and then I'm going to have this else condition where I go in the opposite Y direction. And sure enough, that fixes the acceptance test. Now I'm going to make a note here in the comments, because what I would do at this point is say, I'm not overly confident that this is, awesome. And I'm saying this could sure use some TDD. What I'd really like to be able to do is have this is en passant applicable be a public method and start writing not acceptance tests, but unit tests where I'm kind of driving at the different scenarios here to really tease out the proper functionality for when en passant applies and when it doesn't. However, that is currently a series of private methods in that region I created last time that's just begging to be another class, but it's not another class at the moment. And the reason that's a real bummer, the reason that sucks, is that I can't easily access that method. So that is like 3 deep in the call stack for that class. And so sure, I can write unit tests for it. If this were if I weren't more focused on getting to a finishing point here, I probably would. I don't feel too terrible about it because it is test-driven through the acceptance tests, but it could certainly use some unit tests. And I could write those, but they would be cumbersome. So if I were really focused on getting both unit and acceptance tests around that functionality, what I would do is break that functionality out into a different class. And I'm still on the fence. You may see me do that here in this series yet. And if I do, I will then also go back appropriately and cover it with some unit tests, especially if I start to expose some bugs here somehow. Okay, so all that being said, I am moving on to different acceptance tests. The reason I'm doing that is because I have a hypothesis that maybe I didn't do everything I needed to do. Like it just struck me that, hey, it's great if this is the case, kudos to me in the design. It struck me as potentially suspicious that I only needed to change that code in one place to get the inverse scenario working perfectly. So I'm not so confident if I can only get one of these acceptance tests to pass, but if I get all three of my different en passant scenario tests to pass in reverse, then I get a lot more confident. And that's a hallmark of this sort of approach that you'll see is I'm going to test and confirm and shore up my understanding of things by writing tests. And that's what I'm doing here. I'll feel a lot better if the test I just wrote passed, which it did. And now finally this more complex one about the expiration of en passant passes. Now this one, interestingly, I'm actually a little more confident about for the simple reason that I believe, if memory serves, clearing en passant is just a matter of like wiping out the flag for every piece on the board. So this actually probably should work. And this one was a little bit cumbersome to type, but got it all out there. And I guess I can offer up the spoiler now that I'm pretty sure that it does pass once I, get the actual movements and coordinates correct. Say that with a good bit of confidence because this is one of those nice episodes where I'm recording the audio right after recording the coding itself. So what you'll see, I'll give you a preview of what's going to come next too once this all goes green. If you'll recall, I left that that method I modified in sort of an ugly state. I believe you had that conditional that had a lot of repeating logic in it, and then there was also a sort of obtuse repetition of checking to see if the piece in question was a pawn. So that's in the back of my mind here. I'm sort of driven to get this stuff to turn green because I want to go back and fix that. It's ugly and I don't like it. If you're like me, you'll find yourself actually suffering through that a lot, where you're getting to green and you're itching almost like obsessive compulsively to get it to green so that you can go fix. But that's part of the discipline. You really don't want to be in the habit of writing awesome code to get it to go green. And that may sound silly, but what I mean is it's very easy, and if you're not used to test driving, you'll be very used to instead of just writing something that will work, trying to really make it pretty. Don't do that, not until it's green. Now everything's green. We got all these green tests. Great. Now I can kind of, to my heart's content, play with this thing. But what I'm going to do here is make it a little worse before I make it better. And what I'm seeing is a reasoning about this method. I don't care about anything here if the piece to move is not a pawn. So I'm thinking maybe I just embed all this logic inside of a conditional check for whether the piece is a pawn or not. And then at the end, I'll just return false. So if the piece is a pawn, then go ahead and do all this pawn checking. Otherwise, clearly en passant is not applicable. Now I can get rid of this redundant logic in here. So that's in some ways better, but not really. I have still the same amount of cyclomatic complexity and conditional logic, and you've probably heard me say this before. If you haven't, take note of it now. I'm a firm believer in not having more than one control flow statement inside of a method, if at all possible. So that's, a single if, and I'll count, an if else, or if you got to have it, a case statement is a single control flow statement. So I'm not saying don't have if else, but don't have nested conditionals, don't have, fors and then ifs and whiles and such inside that. So what I'm doing here, you probably figure out as I'm typing it, is trying to get these two statements to be the same. And now that they're the same and I'm still green, what I can do is eliminate the conditional altogether. It is a little bit of hair splitting because I'm just embedding this into the ternary operator. But the reason I prefer this route is not as much cyclomatic complexity, but just in terms of grokking the method. One control flow statement per method means, okay, there's an if or there's a while or whatever. The ternary operator is slightly different in terms of conceiving of your code. Now, I did an interesting thing here. I started to think, do I actually have cases? Do I care about this if piece to move as a pawn? I don't know what set that off in my head, but this is, you're going to see me typing here in a minute. This means at some point I made some sort of oops, because I have this conditional check in here, and I take it out, and it doesn't alter the state of my tests one bit. And what that means is at some point I screwed up on red-green refactor. I added code without a failing test. After all, I have this conditional logic in here saying, return false here if the piece isn't a pawn. But clearly there's no test that is exercising a scenario where that piece is not a pawn. So at some point I got ahead of myself and said, do this stuff that matters, and do it only if it's a pawn. And when I reorganized the conditional logic, that's when it exposed that. And what I'm saying here is this is an even stronger argument. So this is buried 3 deep here. I've got something in here that's not really necessary. If I were coaching a team right now, this is absolutely screaming to be abstracted out into a class so that we can reason about this separately, so that we can put a lot more tests around it, because this is the kind of crap that happens when you get too buried. This logic is 3 deep in the call stack. It's getting to the point where it's not really in my head anymore, and it's a separate concern. This really belongs in another class. And if it's in another class, then I can start answering the questions I'd like to ask with tests, what happens if it's not a pawn? What if I pass in a rook or a king? What if I swap this and that? So I like being able to ask those questions and reason about the answers and do it all via tests. So one last bit of housekeeping I'm doing in here. I'm not overly satisfied with this, but I just put an extra line in there to get rid of this sort of magic number of 2 and -2. So at least here, and then I tried something out that I wound up not liking. So at least I'm saying, 2 is en passant trigger. And so the movement factor is going to be whether it's a first player piece or not, positive or negative. To me, at least, that's a little bit more readable. And I'm trying to consider myself and others coming later. It's not perfect, but I thought it was an improvement. And decided to call it at this particular point for this episode. And I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do next, but stay tuned. I think I'll probably move on to castling, but man, that en passant logic and board is really starting to bother me here. So we'll see. I'll play it by ear, see what I feel like doing. And in the meantime, I will commit the code for this episode and sync it up on GitHub, and that is it. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.